Today I'm going to tell you a story so cold it bites, so ruthless it leaves a mark long after the last word is spoken. Set deep in the American West, where winter swallows sound and the wind cuts through bone like a sharpened blade. It's a land of frozen canyons and endless pine forests, where survival isn't promised and mercy rarely exists. This is a place where fate doesn't knock politely, it kicks the door down. And it all began with something small. A thin ribbon of smoke rising from a lonely cabin in the snow. Just enough to draw the wrong kind of attention. They say the frontier forges men. But the truth is, it breaks them down first. It scrapes away comfort, idle talk, and every trace of softness until nothing remains but grit and bone. Out in the canyonlands, where wind slices through stone like a whetted blade and winter comes down without mercy, the earth doesn't just test a man. It reshapes him into something that can survive. Far from saloon noise and warm hearthlight, Mercer Vale lived alone. Most folks had forgotten him. The few who hadn't spoke his name low, as if saying it too loud might summon something. His cabin leaned crooked among snow-dusted pines, barely bigger than a freight wagon, built from smoke-darkened logs that had weathered too many storms to count. The roof sagged under hides and pine boughs, patched by stubborn hands, yet it stood firm against mountain gales. Wilderness rolled in every direction. Plains that turned brittle and gray in winter, canyons that swallowed a man's voice whole, forests thick enough to hide wolves and worse. Few men rode that far out. Those who did never lingered. They left muttering about the silence, about how it felt heavy, watchful. Mercer thrived in that stillness. He moved like he'd been carved from the same granite as the cliffs, broad shoulders beneath a fur-lined coat, frost caught in his beard, eyes pale as frozen river water. When he rode south to the trading post, half a day through rough country, he spoke little. He'd lay pelts across the counter, fox, mink, sometimes wolf. Abram Voss and the other traders had seen all kinds drift through. But Mercer unsettled them. His hands were thick with scars, cords of muscle drawn tight as wire, like they remembered fights most men wouldn't survive. And there was the story, passed between cups of bitter coffee and rot-gut whiskey. Years back, Mercer Vale had been ambushed by a wolf pack deep in winter. His knife broke. They tore into him. He killed the lead wolf with his bare hands and walked out alive. The wolves did not. Stories grow in the telling. But no one laughed when Mercer stepped through that door. Men dropped their eyes. Women pulled children close. A living legend is a hard thing to stand beside. Yet Mercer never chased reputation. He cared nothing for town gossip or fearful glances. His world was the snap of firewood at midnight, steam rising from a fresh kill, snow grinding under worn boots. He rose before dawn to set traps in gray light, tracked prints through powder, skinned and salted hides by lantern glow. The work was brutal and endless, but in its rhythm he found something close to peace. Solitude was a language he understood better than speech. But peace on the frontier never lasts. That winter cut deeper than most. Rivers iced over early. Wolves drifted down from the high ridges, lean and desperate. Fewer folks saw Mercer at the post. One night, as smoke curled from the potbelly stove, a rider from the south, Dorian Kells, brought word that tightened every jaw in the room. Garrick Thorn and his gang had been spotted along the old canyon trail. The name alone chilled the air. Thorn didn't just rob. He savored fear. The pleading, the look in a man's eyes when hope drained out. His crew followed him like buzzards to carrion, drawn to cruelty as if it were law. Someone muttered that Mercer Vale lived north of that trail. If Thorn rode that way, he'd cross Mercer's land. Elira Dane suggested warning him. Orson Blythe gave a dark chuckle and shook his head. Warn Mercer? If Thorn rides into his yard, It ain't Mercer I'll be worrying about." A few thin smiles followed, but doubt hung heavy. One aging trapper against a pack of killers? The odds didn't favor him. Back in his cabin, Mercer might not have heard the talk. But men like him felt changes in the wind. Violence has a scent. It crawls into the bones before it ever shows its face. He drew a whetstone across his knife, slow and steady, the scrape whispering through the stillness. Outside, night stretched wide and starshot. A wolf howled from deep in the pines, long and mournful. Mercer paused, listening. He knew that sound: hunger, warning, claim. He had little patience left for men. Wolves, though, wolves he understood. He had fought them, bled with them, in some grim way respected them. To face a wolf was to face the frontier itself, merciless, cunning, relentless. That was why the story endured, why men believed it when they saw the way he carried himself. Measured, deliberate, as if always waiting for something to make the first move. The fire burned low. Shadows climbed the rough timber walls. Silence pressed close, broken only by the crack of settling wood or distant ice shifting in the canyon. The land was watching, waiting. Mercer closed his eyes and felt it building, like a storm gathering beyond sight. Morning came pale and cold. He set out as he always did. Traps slung over one shoulder, rifle across his back. Snow reached his knees in places, flashing under a weak sun that gave no warmth. His breath drifted in white plumes. Ravens flapped overhead. Branches snapped sharp in the brittle air. He moved with purpose and caution. Survival leaves no room for carelessness. By midday, he'd set a line of steel traps along the creek and was climbing toward the ridge when he saw them. Tracks that weren't deer or wolf. Fresh hoof prints. More than one horse. The spacing told him everything. Not riders from town. Those men rode steady and slow. These had ridden hard. He crouched, calloused fingers brushing snow aside. 4, maybe 5. Armed, judging by the depth of the stride and the way the horses dragged heavy. His jaw tightened. He had no use for strangers on his land. By dusk, with the sky bleeding red over the canyon rim, he turned back toward the cabin. Smoke rose once more from his chimney. Inside, Mercer had already made his choice. Trouble was riding. Whether it found him or he found it first didn't matter. When men came howling, they were crueler than any beast. He fed the fire until flames leapt high, gold light carving hard lines across his face. No fear touched his eyes. No hesitation. Only the quiet resolve of a man who had survived too long to kneel. Out in the deepening dark, Garrick Thorn's gang rode north like carrion birds on a scent. The land had shaped Mercer Vale into something harder than iron. Soon enough, men would learn what the wilderness already knew. Mercer Vale was no prey. He was the storm. At the front of the column rode Garrick Thorn, a man whose name carried ahead of him like the stink of something long dead. Broad through the shoulders, black hat pulled low over eyes as cold as creek ice, Thorn hadn't earned his place among outlaws with charm or quick-draw flair. He'd earned it with cruelty, slow, deliberate, and mean enough to leave a mark. Behind him came his pack. Coulter Vire, scarred from temple to jaw, rode with a grin full of gold teeth that flashed whenever blood was mentioned. He looked like a man who found humor in funerals. Beside him was Hawk, lean and sharp-eyed, a tracker who missed nothing. He spoke little, and that silence unsettled folks more than shouting ever could. Young Tobin Ash rode stiff in the saddle, barely grown, hungry to prove himself. Whatever innocence he once had was buried somewhere under the bodies he'd helped leave behind. 2 more followed close. Creed Doss, heavy-set and thick-armed, slow with words, but fast with his fists. And Slade Mercer, narrow as barbed wire, quick-moving and mean, his laugh scraping out of his throat like steel dragged across stone. Together, they weren't a gang so much as a pack of coyotes, drawn to weakness, loyal only to plunder. 2 days back, they'd robbed a stagecoach and left it smoldering in the desert. The passengers lay in shallow graves under frozen dirt. The law trailed them, but the wild country hid their tracks well enough. What they needed now was rest, food, a roof over their heads before the next strike. Hawk raised a hand. The riders slowed, horses blowing steam into the cold air. He pointed ahead. A thin thread of smoke curled above the trees. Thorn's eyes narrowed, a slow grin tugging at his mouth. "Well now," he drawled, voice smooth as oil. "Looks like luck finally rode our way. Cabin smoke. Some lonely farmer or trapper holed up for winter. We'll take his food, his fire, maybe his mule if he's got one." Tobin shifted in his saddle. "What if he don't feel like sharing, Garrick?" Thorn spat into the snow. "Then he won't be needing his teeth to chew, will he?" Laughter broke out, harsh, easy. All but Hawk, whose gaze stayed fixed on that ribbon of smoke, measuring it like a sign he didn't yet trust. He said nothing. Thorn nudged his horse forward, and the rest followed, circling the cabin the way vultures circle something already dying. The place stood crooked among the trees, half buried in snow, logs blackened by age, roof sagging under ice. No barn, no stock pen, just a stubborn little house crouched against the wilderness. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Firelight flickered faint behind a narrow window. Thorn swung down and strode to the door, boots crunching loud in the stillness. He didn't bother knocking. He hammered a fist once, twice, then shoved the door wide and stepped inside, revolver loose in his hand. The man within didn't startle. Mercer Vale sat by the fire, drawing a blade across a whetstone with slow, even strokes. The rasp of steel filled the room. His hair was iron gray, beard edged in frost. His body thick with the kind of muscle built from work, not vanity. Pale eyes lifted once toward the intruders, then dropped back to the knife. Thorn spread his arms like he owned the place. "Well, I'll be damned. What have we got here? A hermit trapper?" He sniffed. "Smells like pelts and smoke. You alone, old-timer?" Mercer said nothing. The blade whispered along stone. The gang poured in behind Thorn, boots thudding across plank floorboards. Coulter Vire leaned close, gold teeth flashing. "Look at him, Garrick. Old Coyote thinks he's too good for talk." Tobin glanced nervously at the rifle propped by the door. Creed Doss grabbed it first, laughing like he'd won a prize at a county fair. Mercer didn't move. He set the knife down carefully, like a man finishing a thought. Thorn stepped closer, revolver dangling easy in his grip. "Let's keep this simple, Grandpa. We need food. Whiskey if you've got it. Blankets too. And you're gonna hand it over, 'cause 6 of us and 1 of you don't leave much room for debate." The fire popped. Shadows carved deeper lines into Mercer's face. He raised his eyes and met Thorn's stare. For a single heartbeat, the air shifted. Something old flickered there. Something that made Tobin swallow and wipe the grin clean off Coulter's face. Then, it was gone. Just silence again. Thick, heavy. Thorn chuckled, though it rang hollow. "Cat got your tongue? Or you reckon you're better than us?" Still, Mercer said nothing. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was patience. Hawk shifted in the corner, eyes narrowing as if he'd caught the scent of something he couldn't yet name. Creed rummaged through a cupboard, tossing dried meat and beans onto the table. Slade Mercer found a jug and took a long pull, whiskey spilling down his chin. Tobin edged closer to the fire, trying to warm the chill creeping through him. Coulter hovered. itching for Mercer to speak. Anything to crack the tension so he could laugh again. But Mercer only leaned back in his chair, arms resting loose, as if 6 armed outlaws were nothing more than weather passing through. The knife lay on the table, catching firelight along its edge. His scarred fingers tapped once against the wood. Soft. But in that room, it sounded like a slow heartbeat. Thorn straightened at last, sliding his revolver back into its holster with lazy showmanship. "You'll do just fine, old man. Feed us. Keep your mouth shut."